One of New York's most influential social media experts is leaving his job as Chief Digital Officer of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He's the latest casualty of digital cutbacks at a string of U.S. cultural institutions. Sri Srinivasan became the Met's first CDO in 2013. TRT World's Andre-Pierre du Plessis met up with him in New York.
Over the last 3 years, one of the world's wealthiest museums invested millions of dollars into growing its digital footprint.
We want to be like they are in Silicon Valley, where they think about their audience. The bigger the audience that's digital, the more chance that they're going to come physically to the museum.
Sri Srinivasan is one of only a few chief digital officers. It's a relatively new position at companies hoping to ramp up their presence on social media.
Harvard has a CDO. I was the first CDO at Columbia University. 10 Downing Street has a CDO. What a CDO can do is help a CEO think about what are the next logical steps in the business transformation that needs to happen. Every institution needs to go through a digital transformation.
For New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art, this added digital reach comes with a risk, having to change old habits to cultivate an online following without any guaranteed success.
The museum has had some success in growing its Instagram and Twitter following, but paying Sri $328,000 a year proved unsustainable. The Metropolitan Museum of Art is a giant among New York cultural organizations with an endowment of $2.8 billion. But the museum expects a $40 million deficit over the next 18 months as attendance has dropped. With 70% of its annual operating costs spent on salaries, the museum has frozen hiring and is reducing staff. One of those casualties is Sri, who was among the Met's 22 top-paid employees. Although Sri knew his dream job wouldn't last forever, in an interview in May, the 45-year-old jokingly hoped it would last a little while longer.
I think it's a transitionary role that over time it will disappear. I mean, I hope it won't disappear while I'm still working, but maybe after I retire, I hope it disappears, because I think that a CEO will always need a CFO, a chief marketing officer, chief financial officer, chief technology officer, but he or she is very unlikely to need a chief digital officer after some years, because CEOs will grow up who are digitally native, who understand all of this.
The Met isn't the only New York museum making extreme cuts. Between 2007 and 2014, U.S. museums spent $5 billion on expansion plans. It's the main reason why the Museum of Modern Art and the Brooklyn Museum are also cutting staff, and one that points to a growing problem in American cultural fundraising. Andre-Pierre du Plessis, TRT World, New York.
TRT World's editor-at-large Craig Peters joins me now to talk about how cultural institutions have been struggling to balance their books. Craig, New York museums operate quite differently to other organizations, similar organizations in the rest of the world. How do they make their money?
Well, museums in the United States, unlike the museums behind me here in Paris, which are primarily run and funded by the government, make their money from selling stuff in the museum gift shop. They make their money from endowments, which they take interest off the principal to help run the museum. They make money from corporate sponsorships and donors who give them lots of money. And they also get money from a dwindling supply of government grants, because there's just not enough money. But the real problem that faces them is an age-old problem in museums, and this is what it comes down to. Museums are competing for customers and artwork with private collectors. Now, private collectors have a heck of a lot more money to spend than a museum does on pieces of art that can create blockbuster exhibitions that draw people. So you have this struggle in the art world between wealthy investors looking now primarily at contemporary and modern art, and the other hand, museums like the Met, which are hungry to get a hold of this art. So what do? They go to wealthy individuals and say, can you make a donation of a few $100 million or $1 billion? And these investors do that, but what they want in return is a building or a wing constructed with their name on it. It's all about ego and bragging rights. So that's where the money goes. It doesn't go to an investment. It doesn't go to acquiring new objects for the museum, because someone who's investing in a museum would rather have their name attached to a building, not on the monthly worker payroll.
Okay, Craig, good to speak to you. TRT World's editor-at-large, Craig Kapitas there.